Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's conference call. My name is Amelia Chassé from Heinz Communications, and thank you so much to those of you who've joined. We are going to go ahead and get started with Craig Regelbrugge from SAFE is going to kick off the call. So go ahead, Craig.
Thanks very much, and good day, everyone. I'm talking today in the capacity of representing a coalition called SAFE, which stands for Save America's Food and Economy. And this is a broad-based national coalition that's made up of farmers, farm organizations, community leaders, other people in business who are dependent upon agriculture for their own business, and frankly others who care about American food and the jobs that are associated with the food production system here in this country. And we've joined together, we've decided to call October 27th today Speak Up for America's Food Day, and we've got a lot of activities going on in various parts of the country, a lot of citizen activist lobbying work going on with Congress, and particularly focused activity going on in Florida, California, and a couple of other places, for the simple reason that our coalition is concerned that our society takes its domestically produced food absolutely for granted. It wasn't true 150 years ago. 150 years ago, most Americans lived on farms and they knew the hard work of farming. But in today's culture, a tiny, tiny fraction of a percentage of America's population lives and works on farms. And most never have. Most have no idea how food is produced. They have no idea that the work necessary to produce our fruits and vegetables and dairy products and meat is both skilled and arduous. We're concerned that right now the farming sector that relies on hired labor is especially vulnerable. Basically, farming in rural areas is like the manufacturing in our cities. Farmers take soil and water and labor and sunshine, and they turn it into products that have value, and then value is added to those products down the chain. But labor is one of the critical inputs, and much of what we do in agriculture can't happen without skilled labor. The simple reality is a tiny fraction of American workers are in the food production sector doing the most basic work on the farms, and the majority of the workers who are doing that work are not from around here. They're from other countries. They've come to us with skills that they learned farming back home. And we're very, very concerned that if Congress either acts unwisely, and an example of that, in our opinion, would be to implement mandatory use for all employers of the so-called E-Verify system without a solution dealing with the agricultural labor crisis, or if Congress just doesn't act at all, which has unfortunately been the safer bet over the last several years, that we will continue to see our agricultural production move to other countries in an increasingly global competitive marketplace, and along with it, we will lose the economies, the economic value that sustains rural communities. We will lose thousands upon thousands of off-farm jobs that depend on the farm production in order to exist in this country. So we'll export a bunch of farm worker jobs, but we'll also export a bunch of American jobs. And at the end of the day, we will be less safe as a nation as we rely more and more on other countries to feed us. So we're calling on Congress. We're basically saying, look, doing something like E-Verify without a solution for agriculture will kill the industry. We can be for E-Verify. We can be supportive of a more rational enforcement system, what that looks like. But we need an acceptable solution that ensures a legal and stable labor supply. The current program we have is not that solution. It's known as H-2A. It's a broken program. It supplies a paltry 2 to 4% of the overall hired labor force need in agriculture. It is a system designed to fail. So again, what's bringing us all together is the fears over loss of production, loss of jobs, reliance on other countries for our food, questions that raises relative to our food safety, and the wellness of our economy. So with those as introductory words, when we get into questions and answers, I'm glad to elaborate on anything that I've said. But the main event here today is an opportunity to hear from Congressman Dan Lundgren, who is from the Central Valley of California. He's a Republican in Congress who currently is serving, among other things, on the House Judiciary Committee and the Immigration Subcommittee. Representative Lundgren has a long history in Congress. He was in Congress back in the 80s when really the last major attempt happened when Ronald Reagan was president at attempting to fix our immigration system. Some of what happened back then worked all right and a lot didn't. And the problem that we have now reflects the fact that that we didn't get the solutions that were needed back in 1986. So Mr. Lundgren brings a long history and a deep knowledge, and in the present tense, a keen commitment to resolving this problem to ensure that the agricultural sector in his own district, in his own state, and indeed across the nation remains strong and healthy. So with that, let me turn it over to Congressman Lundgren for your thoughts on where we are and what's ahead.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here so we can talk about this issue because I think it's a very, very important issue. Let me make it clear at the very beginning, I am and remain a supporter of the E-Verify system. One of the problems we had in 1986 when we passed Simpson-Mazzoli was that we promised and thought we had an enforcement system, including employer sanctions, which would be one half of the bill. The other half of the bill was the one-time only legalization program. We thought it was a balanced bill. Many of us worked on that. I was the Republican floor manager for it. Many of us worked with the Reagan administration and tried to make sure that the legislation we passed, the President could sign. The President did sign it. But we always promised that it would be two-sided. That is, we would have the legalization on the one hand, we'd have the enforcement on the other. There's been a failure of enforcement ever since. And one of the problems with that was having a workable employer-sanctioned program, one that was, as I used to say, user-friendly for the employer. That is, where the employer could take certain steps to ensure that he or she were following the law. And secondly, have it as a true enforcement tool. The missing part of that was some sort of identification system or some sort of document that one would present at the time of employment. And at that time, I talked about us having an enhanced Social Security verification system. We didn't quite have the technology at that time, and I'm not sure the heart was in it for people involved. Whatever the reason, we really didn't get that. So in the interim, we've had a number of things occur. One of them was this lack of enforcement has continued to manifest itself with a workforce in agriculture, which is primarily those from other countries. And the H-2A program has not been anywhere sufficient to supply that labor force. The net result is we have a labor force that is significantly made up of those who are in the country illegally. So the question is, for those of us who support E-Verify and at the same time recognize that there is this tremendous reliance by agriculture throughout the country, not just California, not just the Southwest, but throughout the country, specialty crops, fresh fruits and vegetables, also the expansion of the idea of local product. Many people in America now want to have an opportunity, at least an option to buy local products. That does require a labor force in many cases that is somewhat mobile. And because of all of these things and the continued reliance on those workers who are from foreign countries, in the absence of a program that allows them to come here under some sort of legal status, we have a real problem facing us. That is, if we do have a real E-Verify program and we do not have an accompanying program dealing with the labor force for agriculture, we're either going to devastate agriculture throughout the United States, and I know firsthand from my home state of California, or we're going to have, once again, an evasion of the law, neither of which I think are appropriate. So my bill, which I think is absolutely compatible with the E-Verify program, would establish a temporary guest worker program, which the size of which, that is, the numbers of which, would be determined on an annual basis by the Secretary of Agriculture after receiving input from the agricultural community around the country. These individuals would have the obligation to work only in agriculture, but would have the opportunity to actually seek work from different employers. We specifically thought this mobility was not only in response to the reality of the needs of the agricultural employer sector, but it in many ways protects against the abuses that people point out that occurred during the Bracero program, primarily that one absolutely bound to a particular employer had a difficult time registering complaints of his or her treatment by that employer without finding themselves back in their home country. This would give that individual who is in America under this contours of this program the protections of law given to any other legal employee in the United States. They could join unions or not join unions, all those sorts of things. We do have something which we think is consistent with what you see in the Canadian-Mexican guest worker program. That is, in our case, we would have the amount of money that is contributed by the employer and employee go into a trust fund that would normally go into Social Security, but in this case would go into a trust fund. First of all, it would pay for the costs of operating this program so there's no additional cost to the taxpayer. Secondly, would pay for reimbursement to any local jurisdiction for the costs of emergency care rendered to that individual. And then third, the remainder would go to the individual, that is, to the individual worker, by way of an account that would be redeemed in their home country. In other words, they would have to be physically present in their home country. If they did not, they were not there for that during the 2-month period of time they're supposed to be back in their home country, they would forfeit the right to that money, be ineligible for the program, and be obviously in illegal status if they attempted to come back to the United States. Those are the general contours of the program. It is a piece of legislation that I am endeavoring to be seriously considered by the Judiciary Committee. We think we have the attention of the chairman of the committee and others, and I think I could say without fear of contradiction that a E-Verify program will have to be accompanied by a temporary guest worker program that deals with the reality of agriculture around the country, or it will not be successfully brought to the floor. So if anybody has other comments, questions, or however we're going to run this, I'd be happy to answer them.
If you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name. To withdraw your request, you may press star 2. And we do have a question. It comes from Jazz Shaw of Hot Air. Sir, your line is open.
Thank you, Congressman, for holding this conference call, because the original layout was a bit confusing, but there's one part that it just sounds, and I'd just like you to correct me if I'm wrong, is the end goal of this to actually make it more allowable to have people who are in the country illegally stay here and be able to work without changing their status of being here illegally?
No, the purpose is to recognize the reality that we have a large number of people who are here illegally working, that the program does not work under the H-2A program for the flexibility required by American agriculture. And rather than have the presence of people in the country illegally, the purpose is to have a temporary worker program where we, the United States, through the Department of Agriculture, determine who comes in, how long they're here, that is no more than 10 months in a calendar year. They're required to work in agriculture, and create both carrots and sticks to make sure that they follow the law and they return to their country. The purpose is not to have incentives for people to stay in this country as permanent residents. Now, they would be eligible if they wished, while they're in this program, to get in line in their own country and get a number like everybody else in attempting to come into this country as an immigrant with an immigrant visa. But they wouldn't be given no preference for that. They wouldn't get credit for the period of time they've been in the United States working. So the whole idea is, no, not to have people who are here in the country illegally, not to have a magnet for people to come here permanently, but rather to have a recognized temporary guest worker program.
So you'd be registering these people, if I could just follow up, and there would be some sort of a list. Everybody who is participating in the program would be known and identified, and they would be here legally in a different sense?
Yeah, because right now we have farm workers in this country who are here illegally. They would be here in a legal sense. It would be a type of worker visa. It would be limited to 10 months out of a year, only be allowed to work in agriculture. The whole idea is to not give them an incentive to stay in the United States, give them the flexibility to go back to their home country. Now,
so you would be issuing them a type of visa for the period of time they were working for the 10-month period. Now, that wasn't clear before. Thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I show no other questions at this time.
If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1 at this time.
While we're waiting, if there are any other questions, this is Craig. Again, just wanted to sort of offer a perspective from our coalition. Many times agriculture is attacked as liking the status quo, wanting to perpetuate the status quo, being opposed to doing its part on the enforcement side of the equation. And those assertions are completely untrue. Our coalition has been actively seeking legislative relief and a permanent solution to this situation, certainly since the lead up to the legislation that passed in 1986, and really since then, particularly from like the mid-1990s on, as it became clear that the employer sanctions system that the congressman was referring to was failing us, and the workforce was becoming more and more dominated by folks who had papers that look good but are not actually good. They've got the skills needed, but they don't have the papers needed, as it were. So we have for a long time been seeking legislative reforms. At times, those reforms have been sought sort of on a stepwise basis. In other words, there really wasn't an effort to comprehensively retool the whole immigration system. And then for a period of time during the Bush administration, the effort shifted to one where we were focused on the agricultural elements in a much broader bill, which the president supported at that time. But things have in a way come full circle, and there is virtually no broad-based political support right now for taking on some sort of comprehensive overhaul of our immigration system. Many in Congress say, the environment's not right, we have too many other pressing priorities, we need to wait. In the agricultural sector, waiting means economic loss and job loss. We've carefully studied USDA data about trade patterns with other countries, and what we have learned is of the things we consume here, fresh fruits and vegetables, we have watched foreign producers' market share in our own country double to, in some cases, triple over a period of 1997 to 2007. We're talking about China imports of fruits and vegetables to our country increasing by 555%.
Excuse me, we do have some questions at this time.
Sure. Okay, I'll go ahead and pause. Thank you.
Okay, and our first question comes from Matt Gagnon from Pine Tree Politics.
Thank you. I actually had two perhaps kind of unrelated questions to each other. I'll probably ask the easier one first. In terms of getting something like this passed, obviously you're going to come up with this proposal, and it's going to have quite a bit of opposition in front of it, probably from within your own party as well. I'm kind of curious to see what you have for thoughts on how you're going to overcome that and what kind of compromise you might end up with at the end after this is all done.
Well, we've worked very, very closely with all elements of agriculture to make sure that we came up with a plan that was workable from them, was not perfect from their standpoint, was not 100% of what they wanted, but rather a compromise which would be acceptable. So that's why I've tried to make very, very sure that this is a bill that does not in any way grant people conditions towards permanent resident status or citizenship. This is independent of that, number one. Number two, I tried to ensure that this would be flexible enough that it would not just be California-centric. That is, that agriculture in all parts of the country would be able to utilize it. Again, not the perfect answer to what they wanted, but one that is workable and one that I thought could get sufficient number of votes in the Congress. Mm-hmm. Third, there are those who oppose anything that would allow the presence of workers in the United States. Even some don't support that for the most highly skilled folks that work in the high-tech industry. I don't think there's any way I can convince them that this is something they should support. But for those who recognize that we have a reliance on foreign workers in the agricultural industry, in conversations I've had with members, I believe that this is something they can accept. The chairman has originally initiated a companion piece or a complementary piece. Some people would say a competing piece for agriculture that deals with a reform of the H-2A program, although he gives it another number. I have been endeavoring to convince the chairman that while I have no problems with reforming the H-2A program, it will meet maybe the needs of 5% of agriculture. And I think I'm making progress in that. I don't want to speak for the chairman. He'll speak for himself. But we would, if in fact that's accepted, then you have to have a separate program. And that's what we're attempting to present. Look, I believe that if this hit the floor, the contours of what I've outlined, along with a E-Verify, that package would pass the floor. I'm absolutely convinced of that with conversations I've had with members from all around the country. Of course, we have to make sure we get to the floor.
If I could add in before you ask your other question, from a coalition perspective, there are a couple of things happening across the country that I think have raised the profile of the issue and the awareness, and frankly, to varying degrees, the support among Republicans, both tenured and freshmen, as well as a number of Democrats. The first thing is, agriculture has been in sort of a perfect storm environment with the H-2A program spinning into chaos, with I-9 audits hitting a lot of agricultural operations and depriving them of their labor force, putting them into a tailspin. And now we are actually seeing the emergence of something we did not see since 2007, and that is real shortages of bodies. For a long time, we've been decrying the shortage of a legal labor supply, but we're now seeing shortages of actual workers in very diverse places: New York, Western Michigan, Washington State, Florida, California, and elsewhere. And then we also have the punctuation mark, the exclamation point, which is those states which are experimenting with their own immigration laws and having a devastating impact on their own agricultural sectors, the most recent ones being Georgia and Alabama. And there is daily news about the chaos and carnage going on in the agricultural sector in those states, which I think makes lawmakers of all stripes in those states more acutely aware of the need for some kind of a federal solution.
Great. Actually, my second question kind of ties in with the second part of what the previous answer was, and that's kind of in regional differences. And I'm going to have to betray my lack of knowledge on the subject, I guess, but I'm kind of curious about what kind of economic impact different regions of the country would expect from something like this. I'm specifically concerned about New England, I guess. How does that play out, I guess? Are there going to be regions of the country that end up benefiting more or less than others, I guess, in this? And this is just kind of because I don't know.
Right. If I were to answer that question 20 years ago, I would have said that the southwest portion of the United States would benefit more than the rest of the country because the problem or the nature of the challenge was greater or more acute in that area than the rest of the country. That is, the reliance on foreign-born or foreign workers. But over the last 20 years, you've seen a greater and greater reliance on foreign workers throughout agriculture. You also seen as I said, a movement towards a greater reliance on locally grown products, which tends to extend seasonal and specialty crops around the country. The mobility necessary, that is, for people in agriculture who are skilled in agricultural production, working from one area of the country or one area of the country to another, following different crops. So I think if you would talk to your agricultural folks in New England, you would find today that they would say they have a need for this. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, not too long ago, 1,000 acres of onions were plowed under in upstate New York as a result of a failure to be able to get employees. And I believe they made an attempt to try and work through the H-2A program, and it was unsuccessful. So there are stories that you can find all over the country, and I don't mean that they're just anecdotal. I think they're illustrative of the situation that exists.
Yeah, I would add to that. In New England, a Labor Department statistician who was looking at what's called the National Agricultural Worker Survey data several years ago determined that in the northeastern United States, literally 99% of the new applicant pool, people applying to go into agricultural work for the first time, were unauthorized migrants, unauthorized from an immigration standpoint, basically meaning that in the New England and northeastern states, there is essentially no domestic labor pool seeking to do agricultural work. Mm-hmm. In Maine, the blueberry industry, the apples and other fresh produce, to some degree the nursery industry, greenhouses, and so forth, dairying as well, are all very dependent on immigrant labor. And while it doesn't touch on Maine, if the organizers of the call have your contact information, I can get you a regional report that was just done by Farm Credit East that looks at the vulnerability of about 6 northeastern states, New York, New Jersey, and about half of New England. If we arrive at a situation where enforcement-only remedies are applied without something that deals with the labor supply side, looks at on-farm job loss, off-farm job loss, economic loss in communities, so I can get that report to you.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. Thank you.
Sure, and we do have contact information, Craig, so we'll get you guys in touch.
Great, thank you.
And our next question comes from Gregory Cole of Flaps Blog.
Congressman Craig, how are you today?
Great.
Very well.
I have a question. It's on the mind of probably a lot of conservatives here in California and elsewhere, is that aren't these proposals just merely kicking the can down the road? In fact, that's what happened in 86, in the fact that you're going to bring a huge number, or wish to bring in a huge number of foreign workers into the United States and allow them to work here, and hopefully they'll return home, but not really solving the problem of maybe improving agricultural efficiency?
Well, look, you can look at certain agricultural aspects of agriculture where they have improved, quote-unquote, improved agricultural efficiency and gone to more mechanization and so forth. That is not possible for a number of these products. And I'm sure Craig could elaborate on that a little more. But it happens to be a fact, number one. Number two, we have the presence of individuals in the United States who are working in the agriculture arena. We're not attracting them by this legislation. We're trying to have a program by which we get a legal handle over it, and where we have some direction. The fact of the matter is we've had our proverbial head in the sand and pretended that there was not this reliance on foreign workers in agriculture in the United States for the last several decades. And what we have had is not a diminishment in the number of agricultural workers, but a failure to have a legal channel by which they can come here. And third, I would say, perversely, because we have improved our vigilance on the border. Now, once someone comes to the United States to work in agriculture, they have a tremendous disincentive not to go home to visit their relatives for fear that they can't get back into the United States. They will try until they're successful to get to the United States, but then they don't want to go back and have to do that again. So what we've set up is a system by which people are attracted by the fact that there are jobs, by the fact that there's a presence of a large number of illegal aliens in the agricultural fields, and then they have a total disincentive to return home because it just makes it more difficult for them to continue with the job. This is not something to attract them here and then keep them. This is a mechanism by which they can come here to work, but every incentive is for them to send their money back home. Every incentive is for them to keep their families back home. Every incentive is for them to return home. In fact, they are required to return home 2 months out of every calendar year. Or to put it this way, the maximum they could be in the United States any one calendar year would be 10 months.
I don't mean...
And on the if I can just add on the productivity piece, there have been steady gains made across the sector in labor productivity. In some cases, that's mechanization. In some cases, it's other types of labor-saving innovations. And I think the pressures to do that are going to remain as we go forward. We're actually producing a lot more specialty crops and dairy in this country than we used to, and we're doing it with actually less labor than we used to use to produce less, if that makes sense. But there are, and I think that work will continue, although the easy work, to be candid, has been done. And the work that remains is technologically more complicated, and some of it might be theoretically possible, but not economically viable. There are many things you can't do. I mean, designing a machine to pick a soft, stone fruit, peach, or plum or something like that would be exceedingly difficult. At the end of the day, steady gains will continue to be made, I believe, but if we do not have access to a reliable source of labor, the production itself will move. A cold clinical economist might say, may the cheapest producer win. That's the way this works. But we believe when it's about our food supply, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful than just taking a cold clinical economic viewpoint.
Let me follow up if I could. I don't wish to be argumentative with you gentlemen, but the fact is that for as long as I've been alive in the 50s and even back before even World War II, a lot of American voters think that big agriculture has gotten a free ride, and there's been a lot of unintended consequences, and we see them a lot in California. As a dentist, I've seen in Southern California, I've seen a great number of unintended consequences. We have hundreds of thousands, if not people here now, and 2 and 3 and 4 generations of people that came here, migrant workers who came here from Mexico, Central America, and South America to work, and they never went home. And now 2 and 3 and 4 generations later, they're still here. And, of course, they're all American citizens now because of the 14th Amendment. So what is going to assure California voters, Representative Lundgren, that even in this particular program, if your legislation should have passed and be signed into law, that these people actually would go home?
Well, first of all, I disagree with you that the 14th Amendment compels the question of birthright citizenship. That is, by statute, we've never had a decision made on the 14th Amendment, and frankly, if you were to look at the issue of how people who are born on American Samoa are regarded, where they're considered something called American nationals rather than American citizens, I think I wouldn't be so ready to accept the fact that the 14th Amendment mandates it. But that's beside the point. What I've tried to suggest is because we haven't had a legal channel for workers to come to the United States to work in agriculture, we have, in fact, attracted more of those individuals in an illegal status. My idea is to not pretend that this doesn't exist, to recognize that it does exist, and therefore have us make a determination through our Department of Agriculture as to how many workers are needed any particular year. Have that be the number. Have these people be required to actually sign up for the program. We would actually have a priority list. The first group would be those who were specifically requested by name by an employer. Secondly, those who had worked in agriculture previously. And third, by those who had signed up by who got in line first. But the total number would be determined by the United States government, by those people that are supposed to represent us. Right now, it's determined by who can get over the border undetected. And frankly, that system doesn't work. And then when you have a situation where we are doing a better job of stopping people from coming across the border, they have a greater incentive to remain in the United States. So I realize what's happened in the past. I've looked at what's happened over the last 2.5, 3 decades, and I found that's exacerbated the problem that you've just mentioned rather than assisted in controlling that.
And I would just add, I think there are some recent developments, relatively recent, that further compel economic migrants who wish to take jobs that are otherwise going begging in agriculture here in this country to come in through a door rather than across a semi-lawless border. And the border, we have made, political rhetoric aside, we have made tremendous progress on the southern border. It is more difficult to cross than it's ever been. But moreover, and this is an insidious thing, we hear anecdotal reports all the time of migrant farm workers who are being preyed upon by organized crime, by the cartels and so forth, being forced to carry drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And so, these workers who, simply want to come here to work and feed their families are going to choose a legal and safer route over the dangerous and lawless route that exists now.
Okay, one last follow-up. Craig and Representative Lundgren, how many workers are you talking about annually?
I do not put a limit on that, either a low or high limit, because I think it ought to reflect what the reality is, so that it can go up or it can go down depending on what the circumstances are. And it seems to me we'd have a better idea of what is absolutely necessary after a couple of years' operation. The other thing I would say is that the person here in the United States would be required to be working in agriculture, and if they were not working in agriculture, they would be frankly, in violation of the terms of their admission into the United States. So it is meant to be a controlled program that gives everybody an incentive to return to their home country. Frankly, being able to redeem that amount of money that otherwise would go into the Social Security system would be a very effective means. The other thing is, remember, the way I've drafted it only goes into effect if E-Verify goes into effect. Essentially, these are in tandem. So if you believe that E-Verify, which I do, if you do believe E-Verify would be a substantial improvement over the current situation that is mandatory E-Verify, then working in conjunction with this program, you would actually do a far better job than we've had over the last several decades of controlling the illegal flow of workers into the United States for agriculture.
On the question of numbers, I would add that the best available estimates from a gathering of the most knowledgeable people on the demographics of this workforce that happened earlier this year is that there are about 1.83 million hired farm workers in this country, crop and livestock. Most of them are crop workers. And of that 1.83 million, the best evidence is that at least half of them are unauthorized. That number probably exceeds 70%. So a little bit higher in crop, a little bit lower in livestock. So if you were looking to address the presence of unauthorized workers with authorized workers, you'd be talking probably somewhere in the neighborhood of at least 1 million or 1.2 million workers.
Okay, Congressman Lundgren and Craig, we do have another question waiting, but I just wanted to check in and see if you had time for that, or if we should just go ahead and follow.
I can do one other question.
Okay, let's go ahead and do our last question, Jennifer.
And that comes from Jazz Shaw of Hot Air. Sir, you may begin.
Thanks. I I guess I didn't get this the first time around, so I need to do it as a follow-up. You mentioned the fact that the person who was the worker and must work in agriculture would be the person that would have this special status. The fact is, of course, as we've seen, a lot of people don't come alone. They come in and sometimes bring their families. And I'm not saying that's, everybody wants to be with their family, but would this proposal have any impact on the extended who are also going to be using resources?
No, they would not be allowed to bring their families with them. Some of the people complain that this is not fair and so forth, and my response to that is our men and women in uniform fighting all over the world, in most cases, don't have the chance to bring their families. I don't think we should ask any less of the folks who have the benefit of coming in and getting a job in the United States temporarily.
So you're saying anybody that does have their family with them?
Well, what I'm saying is the visa for working does not qualify any other people to come in the United States. You could have two members of the same family who, if they qualify for the worker visa, could come in, but they would be coming in based on their own merits, not that they're the spouse of someone who has this worker visa.
Understood. So if that person, let's say, has someone who is too young to legally work a full-time job in agriculture, then this program would not affect that, let's say, minor. No,
this is non-immigrant, non-derivative benefit visa. This visa only goes to the individual working, has no ancillary benefits to other members of their family.
Does not confer temporary privileges to
Nope.
other
Nope.
entities?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
On the call today, and we'll go ahead and get a recording to everyone afterwards. And any of the bloggers on the call who need to follow up, please, you all have my email. Go ahead and get in touch with me, and we'll get you any information that you need for your stories.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.